Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Hello, this is Chris Haskell from They Live by Film. For those that don't know us, Adam, Zach, and I, we built a podcast over the last 2 years that's a combination of film discussion from 3 very different perspectives, as well as industry interviews with the leaders in boutique Blu-ray and 4K community. We started with Deaf Crocodile, but over time we've been lucky enough to speak with Arrow Video, Severin, Mondo Macabro, Vinegar Syndrome, Radiance, Indicator, most of the OCN partner labels. It's been a blast. You can find us wherever you podcast, and also actually recently as part of Someone's Favorite Production podcast network. We hope to see you online.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, the world's greatest horror movie podcast. In this episode, my weird dad will be talking about
cockfighting. Hello, and welcome to Wake Up Heavy, Recollections of Horror. This is Mark Begley, your host, and today is a not very special episode. This is the What's Happening episode. Which I had planned to record earlier this month to let people know that yes, I am still around and I do have plans to record episodes, and I disappeared inadvertently during the month of May. And there's a very good reason for that, and a very big reason for that personally. And if you follow me on social media, you probably already know what that is. In May, my wife and I finally decided to paint our house after living here for 14 years. 14 years at the end of this month, I believe. I think our move-in date was July 1st, but we were in a couple days early. Anyway.
That's so interesting.
It sorely needed it. The paint was peeling on numerous spots over the house because of sun and rain damage. So most of May for me was taken up with that work. The prep work took a long time. Nearly every day I worked, I don't know how many hours each day, scraping and peeling and spraying and spackling and all kinds of other things. And since I'm home, I did the bulk of the work, but of course every day my wife would join in, and my whole family came out the weekend of Memorial Day and helped us prime the house, which we did with rollers and paintbrushes, and quickly realized after a long, thankfully not very hot, 8-hour day with about 8 of us working, that doing 2 coats of paint in that same manner was not going to happen. So I bought a paint sprayer, painted the house in 2 coats the next weekend on my own, well, with my wife's help. But I manned the sprayer the whole time, and it took 2 days, about 4 hours one day, and a little bit longer the second day, just because I was moving a lot slower to finish it. Now we have a horror house. It is basically black, and I will try and get a decent picture to use as the player image for this episode. Again, if you follow me on, especially on Instagram, you have seen the pictures. It is a very dark gray. It's called Dark Engine, which is awesome. And I guess it's kind of the trendy thing to do with mid-century modern houses. We really like dark grays, and my daughter and wife preferred this very dark version. So that's what we did. And we're just waiting to paint some of the trim, the fascia of the house. That's the only trim we're going to have painted. And we've got some groovy new mid-century mod house numbers coming that we just ordered. That was May. I haven't released anything since April, the Good Bar episode. If you haven't listened to that, you should go. I have done some recordings, mostly with Chris over at the Culture Cast. We did the recent crossover with Poltergeist and the Conjuring universe, but I had also done a few others, and I'll get into more of those recordings in a bit here. So this is just a catch-up. Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm planning on recording. Cleo and I were supposed to do a Godzilla Versus episode back in April, and it just didn't happen. We had done some traveling. Her spring break ended. We had watched Ghidorah and just didn't get around to recording it. So we'll either watch that again and do something or watch a different one. And I also have another classic horror movie to show her that I've been wanting to show her for a while. And since I most likely would never do a regular episode on this movie, even though it's one of my all-time favorites, it's actually a good excuse to do something with her and get her angle on it, because I'm sure that this movie that I'm being vague about has been discussed on nearly every other horror movie podcast that's out there, so why do another one? Other than that, I don't have major plans. I need to do another Why Didn't I Rent This episode, and I've had a couple ideas and then I lose them, and so hopefully one of those will pop up back into my head, or I will find something that pops up on Shudder maybe that I ignored years ago and finally get to see and enjoy. I have watched some that I missed years ago and didn't quite enjoy. My biggest plans are for later this year, starting in October during spooky season, with a series on 3 films by a couple of... I don't want to be vague. Well, I do want to be vague, but I can't quite come up with the words to describe these guys, but they worked together a number of times in the early 70s, produced 3 really amazing horror movies in a 2-year span, went on to do lots of other things in their careers, and we're going to talk about these 3 movies that they made together. And I've got the guest hosts all lined up. I will hopefully have an interview with one of the people responsible for these 3 films, and a return of a guest from an older episode that has written a book about one of these guys. So that will be the big end of the year deal for me. Other than that, I don't have any solid plans. Since I haven't really put out an episode since early April, I thought I would do a little bit of movie watching recs, and I, again, don't have that many because of the house painting and other things that have been going on. But I have had a couple of, I would say, top 10 entries into my watch list during this time, as well as some repeat watches, some marathons of certain people, and of course some fun family watches. I hope I'm not repeating anything from an earlier episode that's pre-Good Bar, but if I've mentioned one or more of these movies in that time, just excuse it as my bad memory. During this period that stretches back till April, my family and I watched 9 to 5.
Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living.
And I hadn't seen it in years, and I can't remember what the impetus was for watching it. My wife kept mentioning it, and so we watched it. Cleo really enjoyed it. I forgot how kind of not wacky, but it's sort of all over the place, but a lot of fun to watch. And of course, the 3 leads are just amazing in that. I got my Asian movie fix with Yokai Monsters, 100 Monsters, and I'm sure it goes under different titles, from 1968. Fun Japanese ghost stories told almost anthology-esque and more like a omnibus film like The Hammer or Asylum Pictures from around the same time. I watched Holy Flame of the Martial World, great Shaw Brothers Kung Fu classic. Something I had been trying to watch for a while, and I had Chris track down for me, Chris from CultureCast, Looker from 1981 with Albert Finney. Funky sci-fi film that I remember liking a lot. It's very dated, but still a lot of fun. And then one of the marathons I partook of was a Monty Hellman marathon. This is a director that I don't know much about and hadn't seen many of his films prior to this. Knew about a lot of them. Know about Two Lane Blacktop. That's a movie I've avoided for years. Not really sure why, other than I'm not the biggest James Taylor fan in the world.
And rockabye, sweet baby James.
I do need to still see that one, but he passed away recently, and so that brought this to mind. I watched Ride in the Whirlwind, The Shooting, Flight to Fury, and Cockfighter, and I'll talk more about that one in a minute. Harry Dean Stanton is in Cockfighter, and that led me to another film of his, early film that I hadn't seen before, which was Cisco Pike with Chris Christopherson. Speaking of musicians that tried their hand at acting, pretty fun, good early 70s, almost noirish, country-tinged feel to it. Because of the CultureCast and watching Citizen Kane for the first time, I did a little mini Orson Welles fest with Citizen Kane, The Stranger, and The Third Man. And I really enjoyed The Third Man, and mainly because of Alida Valli, who is in Suspiria, who was in Eyes Without a Face, who I always forget had been acting for decades and decades before Suspiria. And she's just amazing in this. And then because of our good friends over at the Projection Booth podcast doing a couple of John Carpenter movies recently for their show, I watched Escape from New York, all-time classic, rented that God knows how many times as a kid. Assault on Precinct 13, which I didn't rent when I was younger, but have watched nearly every year for the past 5 or 6 years. Really great example of how to do low-budget action right.
I want a vanilla twist.
And I watched The Fog and rounded it out with Christine. Christine is near and dear to my heart. First John Carpenter movie I ever saw in the theater. First Stephen King movie I ever saw in the theater. And I still love it. And I don't care if they're doing another version. I'll be there. I have been knee-deep in spaghetti westerns for the last couple of months because of an upcoming recording for the Projection Booth, which should be out, I think, sometime in July. We're recording it in July, and I don't know how quick Mike plans on turning that around. That'll be interesting, and some of them have been really good, and some have been not so good. But I will direct you, of course, to that episode when it comes out. My oldest movie watch during this time was Dr. X on TCM from 1932. Really weird, pretty creepy horror film with Fay Wray. And it was this weird 2-color process that they use. So you get all these greens and blues and things, but it was just really fascinating and had some really honestly creepy parts in it, and I really enjoyed it. And that was one of my favorite, definitely one of my top watches from this time period. Next up was Alien 3, and this was a family watch, and this was, I think, per Cleo's request. And it is not my favorite Alien film. I think she enjoyed it. We didn't watch whatever the preferred cut is out there, the composite cut or whatnot. I didn't have access to that, so we just watched the basic theatrical cut. So, boo, hiss, whatever.
Go, bitch!
I've never seen any other cut of this film. I think this is maybe the second time I've watched it. And yeah, we need to explore more of those. I don't have a place for it, but I think the movies, at least the first 3, kind of go in order. as far as my rating of them. Alien is a classic. Aliens, I enjoy. Too much action for me. Alien 3 was pretty far down after those two. And I am a confirmed fan of Prometheus and Covenant, just so you know. My wife and I watched, and I'm so glad we watched this, the recent Netflix film, and I don't think it was supposed to be a Netflix film. I remember, or released directly to Netflix film, I should say. I remember seeing a preview for this a while ago before lockdown. And so it may have been a proposed theatrical release, probably for the best that it came out on Netflix. But we watched The Woman in the Window. I was curious about it because I love Rear Window-esque movies. And I like Amy Adams and all the other people in it. Gary Oldman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, so on and so on. Wyatt Russell's in it. And when it came out, I just kept seeing all these negative reactions to it on Twitter. I was like, oh no. But we watched it. It's fucking wacky as hell. I kind of love it. And I think my wife enjoyed it. It's like, this is one of the things I tweeted as we were watching it. It is like every person in the film is in a different movie. It is so weird. The acting is so strange. The situations are bizarre. But it's one of those messes that for me worked overall. And I liked all the overt nods to Rear Window and other classic movies. And if you watch it and absolutely hate it, don't blame me. It's not going to be for everybody. But I got a big kick out of this fucking weirdo movie. And I will definitely watch it again. I watched one of those movies, and I wish I had made a longer list of my TV movie watches of films that were released to the theaters originally. My TV episodes that I've done. I just forget all of the wonderful movies that I watched on TV for the first time that I would later go back and rent or see on cable. And so one of those was And Justice for All. And I saw a lot of Al Pacino movies as a kid on TV for the first time. Same with Dustin Hoffman. Again, I don't remember this being so weird. I remember it being a courtroom drama, but there's just this odd humor in there. And this is, I guess, a 70s thing where the mix was okay. Like the tone, it didn't matter if there were these weird tonal shifts. Actually pretty serious, the topic is, but it's like they decided to play a lot of the scenes for laughs. I don't know, it's bizarre, but really good. Al Pacino's great in it. It's sort of a different role for him. He plays more of a normal guy in this. Jack Warden is fantastic as a crazy judge, and just a lot of fun. And I was glad that I stopped and watched it. I think it was on TCM.
When you are out of order. You're out of order. You're out of order. The whole trial is out of order. They're out of order.
Which also brought a movie that I have been wanting to see for a long time with Malcolm McDowell and David Warner and Mary Steenburgen called Time After Time. Another film that I saw for the first time on TV. I may have rented it. I kind of think it was a TV watch. H.G. Wells goes after Jack the Ripper in modern-day San Francisco. It worked still. It's a little bit dated. That goes to the movie since we're dealing with a fish out of water, out of time. H.G. Wells in the future. And all the future stuff is so antiquated now. But I got a kick out of that. And Mary Steenburgen is just great in this movie. I had a lot of fun watching it. And now I'm more familiar actually with David Warner than I was back then as a kid. One of the few modern horror movies that I shouldn't say that I watched, but that I enjoyed is new to Shudder, and it's called Caveat, and I believe it's Irish. And it's a very simple story, very slow burn. There's something about the accents and not being super familiar with the actors that can help me lose myself in a seemed like a low budget film to me, that might make it work more than some of the recent low budget American horror that I've seen on Shudder. This follows that slow build, low noises, slow creepiness that I enjoy, that I discussed on The Conjuring crossover with Chris that I've talked about in the past. It is not loud and obnoxious and fast moving horror. It's a very simple story. It would work well with a film that I know I've mentioned in the past on one of these lists called Possum. And, there was another movie that I said it would pair well with, and now I can't remember what it is. Darn it, I'll have to look at my tweets. Go follow me on Twitter and find out what it was that I said. I finally discovered that The Sentinel, now this is the 1977 movie, is on Tubi, and I have been doing my daily, although I haven't been doing that lately, my daily streaming search for this movie for years, and I tried to get it at the library. It was only available through Hoopla for a long time, which some libraries are connected to. Our library is not. And I think I may have even looked at getting it on DVD or Blu-ray and just couldn't find anything and didn't want to take the chance of buying a crappy version of it. I was about to ask Chris from CultureCast to get this and put it on his Plex server, and did my Just Watch search, and lo and behold, it's on Tubi. The ending can be rough for some people, and I don't want to give too much away, but just be warned that it's something that was taken to task at the time, and I think the director has even said that he wouldn't have done it this way now. Basically using disfigured and disabled people in an unsympathetic way. That's not the word I'm looking for. It can be unnerving, and I think that was the point, but in a different way than I believe was intended. But it is a weird 70s Rosemary's Baby, Omen ripoff. You've got Jeff Goldblum, who unfortunately gets dubbed in the film for some reason, in an early role. Christopher Walken in an early role. Tom Berenger in basically a cameo at the end, and Chris Sarandon with a 70s mustache. One of my all-time favorites who I love seeing show up in horror movies in the 70s, Burgess Meredith. It's got this wacky cast of older actors, and again, this was kind of a trend at the time. Some of these older actors were in a lot of the natural disaster movies at the time, and so they tried to kind of do the same thing with horror movies. There's Ava Gardner, John Carradine, who was just in horror movies throughout his whole entire life, and then these younger up-and-coming actors. And it's something that made a big impression on me back in the 80s when I first watched it. I'm glad I watched it again, and I will probably watch it again in the future, but just be warned that the ending can be unsettling. Okay, for my favorite... Oh, and of course I watched all the Poltergeist film and most of the Conjuring Universe films for those episodes. Favorite watches, and this is the one movie that I'm not sure if I had mentioned before in an early list, is Relic. I believe it's a New Zealand film.
That doesn't sound right.
Mark is wrong. It is an Australian film.
It got compared to Hereditary a lot because it deals with grief and more realistic horror, but man, I really loved it, and it hits really hard at the end. And then an amazing documentary that I believe is over 3 hours long, all about folk horror, so you know I'm there. Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, a history of folk horror. I enjoyed it quite a bit. One of my favorite subgenres, and I got introduced to a whole bunch of movies that I need to track down now. And I believe there is a Letterboxd list for the movies mentioned in that film, and I'll try and find it and maybe link it to the show notes for this. I did a rewatch of Death Dream, and that is a movie that I enjoy more every time I watched it, and I think it may have even gotten up to the 5-star rating for me on Letterboxd. And these next three are my most favorite watches during this time. The first was Sorcerer, William Friedkin's movie from 1977, which I have been trying to watch forever. It may be on Canopy in your area. Just depends on where you live and what your library offers. Watch it if you can. absolutely amazing. I've been told it's a classic. I've read it's a classic. And it lives up to that. Absolutely engrossing. The bridge scene is some of the most tension-filled minutes of movie I have ever seen in my life. 5 stars, no doubt. Can't wait to watch it again. Cockfighter is the Monty Hellman movie I mentioned earlier. Again, I had been trying to track this down since I had first heard about it. I'm not sure how many years ago. And it would just never stream anywhere. Monty Hellman passed away. Kept seeing stuff about him on Twitter. Did my usual search. And lo and behold, it's streaming like everywhere. It was on Prime, Epix, Tubi, and 3 or 4 other streaming services. Warren Oates, who's been a favorite of mine since I saw Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia years ago. It has a wonderful 70s cast with Warren Oates, Richard B. Schull, Harry Dean Stanton. This is what kind of got me on my Harry Dean Stanton kick. Ed Begley Jr.
I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. You have early onset grumpiness.
What?
Early onset grumpiness, EOG. You're going to begin to enjoy fewer and fewer things in your life. You'll be saying things like, who are these people?
Who are those people? It's a real question.
The only reason you leave the house is to see classic old movies, and even then you'll say, it had some good parts, but all in all, it was fairly uneven.
And an early role from Steve Railsback that's pretty funny. I have to say, though, there is real cockfighting in this film and real deaths of chickens in this film. So if that in any way bothers you, do not watch it. It bothered me a little knowing that it was real. Don't watch it if that bothers you, and I can totally understand that viewpoint. But this slice of life film was just great. The performances are wonderful. Millie Perkins is in it, and she was in a number of Monty Hellman's films. And I've really only seen her in The Witch Who Came In From the Sea and a couple other things. So it was great seeing her in all the different movies. A couple other of his actors, although not Jack Nicholson, show up in each one of these films that I watched. And I mean, anytime a young Ed Begley Jr. shows up and gets his ass kicked, I have to smile. So,
cockfighting, the dirtiest sport in the world.
And the next one has some connections to this in a way. This was my other favorite watch, and I had just learned about this movie, or relearned about this movie, because of the Blu-ray company Fun City Editions, and they are connected to in some way, and Sam Deegan talked about this on the Brood episode, connected to, I believe, Vinegar Syndrome. They put out these mostly 70s films that are really underseen. A lot of them I've never even heard of. This one I thought I hadn't heard of, but then I saw the VHS cover and I was like, oh, I used to see this all the time at the video store. Never had any idea what it was about. Just assumed it was a Western. But it's called Rancho Deluxe, and it's with Jeff Bridges and Sam Waterston. And Harry Dean Stanton is in it. And a bunch of other that guy 70s character actors. There is a very brief blink and you'll miss it cameo from Warren Oates, which I did miss and only realized I'd missed it because of a recent post by Fun City Editions.
Mark forgot to mention Slim Pickens and Joe Spinell. Joe Spinell plays Sam Waterston's father, and they are supposed to be Native Americans, which is weird.
It's weird and funny. The storyline is bizarre. And it was a whole heck of a lot of fun. I believe that Fun City Editions is putting out a Blu-ray of this. They've been posting about it for the last month or so, or the last few weeks at least. But it's on Tubi. I almost hate to say that since they're releasing a Blu-ray of it, but it is available. And I watched it and just had an absolute blast. And I think it might be on another streaming channel as well. Check that out. All right, that's my movie watches. I did want to mention my Culture Cast appearances because I have been on a number of episodes, and I put those on my site, and I generally mention them. But just in case, I don't know who follows me to other appearances on shows and who doesn't. If you don't want to hear me talk about non-horror, I guess avoid them. but it gives me a chance to talk about non-horror movies. And it's also presented me with a chance to talk about movies that I don't like. Those are two things that I avoid on Wake Up Heavy. I try to talk about things I like on the show, and I generally, not always, talk about horror. So I have done a myriad of genres and films over there, including 80s body swap movies with 18 Again, Disney original movies with Camp Rock. I did a neo-noir called The Kill-Off. I did an Indian film called Kocha Kocha Hota Hey. Citizen Kane, of course. I did the Howl's Moving Castle for his Patreon, which I have a preview of in my feed. I did The Conjuring, and I usually have something lined up. Every time we record, Chris will ask me to be on something else, and I generally, unless I absolutely hate the film, won't do it, or if it's something I'm just not interested in, I won't do it. But for the most part, it gives me a chance to see new stuff and maybe have a different kind of viewpoint on something that I don't know all that much about. Which is a nice segue into our discussion on Poltergeist about E.T. and how it came together. And we both were kind of right and both a little bit wrong. So we talked about how E.T. originated as a darker, more horror-related movie. Projection Booth Podcast just put out an episode on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and this comes up because it was born out of that, and how Spielberg doesn't like to make sequels. So Close Encounters comes out. Of course, Hollywood wants to make a sequel. His idea was night skies, so that's where the night comes in. And instead of friendly aliens, we have evil aliens. John Sayles wrote a treatment for this story that involved a family on a farm being terrorized by a group of aliens. And bits and pieces of that ended up turning into a bunch of other Spielberg movies down the road. Of course, the main one was E.T., where the nice alien in this group becomes E.T., gets found by this family, the rest of the story. Part of that story becomes Poltergeist, with a family being terrorized. Instead of aliens, we have ghosts. And part of it becomes Gremlins, because the original true story, or quote-unquote true story, that this idea was based on was about a family in Kentucky whose farm was terrorized by gremlin-like aliens. So, Night Skies, that was the original iteration of E.T. Now, Nocturnal Fears, that Chris talked about, was the proposed sequel of E.T., which I don't know if I've ever even heard that there was supposed to be a sequel to E.T. But again, it sort of goes back to Night Skies in that now it's evil aliens. They've come back to the forest where E.T. had left. They terrorize the same family, the E.T. family, Henry Thomas and all the D. Wallace and everybody. And then I think E.T. comes back to save the day or something like that. So Night Skies, that's where I was getting my info from. Nocturnal Fears is what Chris was referencing. Neither of them happened, and it's probably for the best because the stories sound kind of awful. I just wanted to clear that up, and I was happy to actually have that information for myself. This has gone on way longer than I anticipated. Oh, I did want to mention my link tree, which I really only have on Instagram, because as I mentioned in talking to Chris, Instagram is shit for links. You can't add them to anything except your stories, and even then, it doesn't always work as you anticipated. And I have put all of the podcast platforms that I know of where you can find Wake Up Heavy. If you like a certain platform, check for it there. If it's not on the platform that you prefer, please let me know. And there are tons that I don't know about, but I threw a whole bunch up there. I found a review of the show on Podchaser, so that was cool for me to see. because I really only ever check iTunes for reviews, so this completely slipped by me. But please leave ratings wherever you like. iTunes just helps with the algorithm and getting the podcast out there more. Yes, if you have a podcast platform that you prefer, let me know, and I will try my darndest to get it on there. All right, now I'm done, in earnest this time. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget,
anything can happen when you wake up heavy.
Restless daydream, thoughts of jail, dust clouds rising, tearing down the trail. Got our plans laid to make a few bucks, buy a spread called Rancho Deluxe. No, we're not outlaws or common thieves, just a few aces with cards up our sleeves. We've got to gamble, got to take a chance, want to see the whole show and not just one dance. Yeah, we got to try and find the way. We're gonna laugh, we're gonna drink, we're gonna play. Just bouncing around the mountains day to day. Oh, crazy mountains, they named you well. White men and red men, stories we heard tell.